Welcome to Epic Begins with One Step Forward, the podcast that reveals how to plan, achieve, and enjoy the journey of creating epic results in your life, business, health, and relationships. Here's your host, best-selling author and motivational speaker, Zander Sprague.
Hello, epic people, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Epic Begins with One Step Forward. I'm your host, Zander Sprague, and today I am, so honored to have Michael Stockham join me to talk about his epic journey. So, Michael, tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I'm currently a partner in a large law firm in Dallas, Texas. So I spend most of my days helping companies that have problems with either the government, shareholders, or auditors, et cetera. So I do internal investigations on whistleblower claims, securities, class actions, proxy fights, represent folks in front of the SEC and the DOJ. So that's my general day-to-day bread and butter time spent.
Absolutely. But you also do something else, don't you, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. So around the COVID time frame, I had a severe bout of insomnia and needed something to fill the early morning hours. So I went back to a lifelong dream of writing a novel and started on that process and have been successful at getting 2 novels out. My second novel just released in December. And so I've been very excited to see that progress. And the novels have been somewhat successful. So I'm proud of it, and I'm excited that I got to do something I've always wanted to do.
And it's awesome. Congratulations. The books are great. I'll have you talk about them in just a second.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
But this lifelong dream, this epic dream of, I'd like to write a book sometime. You know, I talk about it all the time, but here I have someone who's like, oh, someday I'd like to write a book. And he took that first step forward. So what was sort of the tipping point for you to sit down and start to write the novel?
Yeah, so it is a lifelong dream. I'm sort of an accident, or a lawyer by accident, if you will. I was originally supposed to be a poet. So my original degree is in writing poetry from the University of New Mexico. And then I doubled down on that and got a master's degree in writing short fiction from Texas A&M University. In between those 2 degrees, I spent 9 months in the wilderness as a fly fishing guide on a small river in northern New Mexico. And then after that, I was all kinds of things, like a mason's apprentice, a dishwasher. I had all kinds of odd jobs. I was a telemarketer for a while, sold medical supplies. Ultimately went back to law school, but through all of those journeys and all of that time, and even being an associate and ultimately a partner in the law firm, the one thing that I kept coming back to almost like a compulsion was writing over and over. And I have a couple of other novels, really terrible novels in a desk drawer. But I also, I ultimately, when I finally, when COVID came around and I had time to think and extra time on my hands, so to speak, I thought, well, I'm not getting any younger. I was about 50, 51 at the time, and decided it was time to get started.
Yeah.
On working on it and trying to figure out a way to put together a novel and go forward.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's, I've written 3 books, and I did not, however, have a burning desire to write a book. I mean, I know you've heard this before. If you asked me in college whether I'd write a book, I'd be like, heck no, I hate writing. And I joke that I'm a talker, not a typer. And yet somehow I've written 3 books.
Yeah.
2 of them I'm lucky enough to have been Amazon bestsellers. How that happened, they're good books. I don't want to discount my books, but it would just, seriously, things that I never thought would happen in my life. And so it's great that you have that passion. Talk a little about, because your idea here is not that, oh, I'm just going to write a novel.
Correct. So I wrote my first novel, Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer, and that was sort of a one-time story. It's based loosely on actual events in my life, etc. And then after that, I wanted to do a little bit different projects, sort of free myself up or dislocate from actual experience, which is quite freeing, because if you're not writing about something that you actually experienced, then you're not worried about being truthful.
Yeah.
You could just be creative. And so I thought, well, I'd like to write a series, and I didn't really have any idea how many I wanted to write. So I started thinking about, in bits and pieces, how I would put it together. And it seemed to somewhat fit to do it in threes. So to try to set it up as a series of 9 books in sort of 3 trilogies, if you will, where one sort of series of events goes over 3 novels, and then another series over the next. So it is quite a project. It's somewhat daunting to know that you've written a novel and all the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into that, and then realize, oh, wow, I'm only 12% done. But it's still exciting to think about moving that forward. And one thing I've really enjoyed is when you do this, you get to know the characters, and so you get to live within that world much longer than just one book, and that's really satisfying.
Absolutely. And the ideas of developing them, and then as you're writing, like a human being, you're like, oh, I hadn't thought, but maybe we'll introduce this, and then we can call back in 2 novels about this. So and I have to imagine that in order to envision a 9-novel arc, that requires a lot of organization and creation of structure to make sure that you're sort of at least have an idea of where you're going. Am I right?
Yes. So there is some serendipitous sort of creativity that leads you in different directions, but overall, especially almost like in a science fiction series where you were creating a world, you start to have sort of a superstructure, if you will, to the book, of things that become very common. Like I said, the characters start to live on their own, and so they each have their own personalities, which continue. And then the organization of it is really a constant tension, trying to figure out how to do it better, faster, in a more organized manner, because you're really learning not only the craft of novel writing, but also sort of how to put these larger arcs together. So the process for the first book is completely different than the process I used to write the first book in Jake Fox. So Confessions was differently put together than this one, the Ties That Blind. And the second novel that I'm working on right now, we're going through the outline process, and we're refining at this point how we do that to make it more efficient and to help keep the structures together, especially since it's a 9-book project.
Definitely. And just so that people know, you're not. I know on one of them you're not actually using your name. It's under a pen name. Is that correct?
Well, they're both under Michael Stockham. The Jake Fox Ties That Blind, Jake Fox is the main character.
I got it.
He's a lawyer that returns to a small town in Texas where he grew up.
Okay.
And it goes from there.
Okay.
But
I just remember there was Jake Fox. I'm like, oh, okay. So that's your character. That's sort of the Jake Fox series. Okay.
Correct.
Cool. And are these legal? These are legal thrillers? Is that how you would say they are? Or are they
that's sort of the main genre: legal thriller, domestic thriller, psychological thriller. They all try to have some sort of legal component to it.
Okay.
It's not all. There's not a central trial to each one or a central murder trial. But if you think about, the full works of, say, John Grisham, all of his books tend to have some sort of intersection into either a legal a trial, or a legal concept, or a legal problem, or just generally the problems that leak into a lawyer's life, that kind of thing. But
absolutely,
the nexus is the law. Yeah.
Cool. So one of the things I talk about in Epic Begins with One Step Forward is these 2 important words of not yet.
Right.
And boy, you've got a very long not yet going on, because it takes time to write 9 novels, especially if you're a partner in a successful law firm, which I have to imagine keeps you kind of busy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for you, that idea of not yet, and really having to wait to get stuff done. How is that process for you? How is that feeling of like, okay, yeah, not yet. I don't have the second novel written. I'm working on it, you know.
Sure. I mean, there's always that you have to balance the anticipation with against sort of the overwhelming, maybe odds would be a way of saying it, but it is a large task. And you can couple that accidentally or channel that accidentally into procrastination. And those are probably the biggest momentum busters there are. Sometimes the task seems so large that perhaps you're not going to work on it today. There's always tomorrow if it's just so big. But you kind of have to do it one little step at a time. And there are some things that I try to remember. I've heard how to eat an elephant one bite at a time.
Yeah.
I keep that in mind. And then I also, since I spent so much time on rivers and fishing and other stuff, I've always been amazed with how water works.
Yeah.
And, one drip of water or one small tiny dribble can drill a hole through a rock if you just give it enough time. And it's really persistent effort ultimately that gets to the result. So you try to take it one day at a time. You take it one morning at a time. I tend to be an early riser, so I get up at 4 and try to do what I can on the book, the publishing, the processing, the marketing. And then I take a shower and get into the office about 8:30. So
Yeah.
I try to do something every day, try to be productive every day. And sometimes I'm not successful, but most days I am.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's true of anything. And I certainly know on many of the things I've done, it's a iterative process. Like it's
Sure.
just
Sure.
when I was training for marathons, some days I had good runs, some days I didn't have good runs. Some days it was raining, some days it wasn't. But it was more the cumulative effect in writing my books. I didn't sit down and write everything all at once. And in
Right.
fact, you talked about how to eat an elephant. I talk about the pizza analogy of,
Sure.
when we eat a pizza, we tend to eat it one slice at a time. Unless, of course, there's a adolescent boy around, in which case you may be eating two at a time. Otherwise, you're not going to eat. But that's not the point. But we tend to eat a pizza. You can eat a whole pizza, but you do it one slice at a time, one bite at a time. And I think for whatever your epic is, if it's extended, you just every day work at it and set a schedule.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Structure is so important because you're right. Oh man, I'm not feeling creative today. I don't know. And it's true. But if you say, I'm going to write, whatever, half a chapter, or here's what I'm going to work on today. Some days you get on a roll and you may be bummed. You're like, oh man, I got to stop, but I'm really on a roll, but I gotta get showered to get to the office. And other days you may be, I know I had days where I'm staring at the computer going, what am I, and keep in mind, I was like dictating most of my books, but even then I'm
Yeah.
sitting there like going, I don't know what I want to say on this. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm sure you've written stuff and then you go back and read and go, oh no, that wasn't good. That's not how I wanted that to go. So
Yeah, revision's a good part of it. Structure, like you mentioned, is extremely important.
yeah,
Just having a routine to try to do stuff. And then systems is another great tool. Being able to set up a system on how you do certain tasks each time or try to do them in the same order. So I tend to try to write, most of my chapters are very short. They're about
yeah,
1,250 words, which is something I could rough draft in the morning and then work through with, some sort of editing aid like Pro Writing Aid or something else at night. That's one system. Another one typically is for some chapters in particular, I'll run across a song that I really like and I'll just put it on repeat until I'm done with the first draft because there's a mood or a concept that's in the music that is working with the chapter. So systems and little tricks can be helpful in breaking down each one of those individual bites towards that bigger overall goal.
absolutely. And what is your, like, if you were to look into the future, what do you want for your Jake Fox series? What would be some of the goals?
Well, one, I'd like it to be well received, and it is being well received. So that's great. That's one success. Ultimately, I'm not going to be a lawyer forever.
Mhm.
So perhaps over time it can develop into its own series and be an alternative source of income. I mean, there's a practicality to it all. Uh, my father is just celebrated his 90th birthday, and his mother passed away at 105.
Wow.
That with those genes, there's a possibility that I will have a lot of time after retirement to figure out what to do.
Definitely.
And having a writing career and doing something like this, both would be enjoyable, exciting, and I think stimulated, something to do in my older years where I'm not just sitting around watching Jeopardy, although I do love Jeopardy. So there's that concept. And then, it's currently as an indie author. So we're learning all of the new and interesting things about how to self-publish, learning about running your own press. So there's a lot of going out and finding cover designer, proofreaders, people that actually help and can do the production on the books. So there's a whole huge learning curve on it. And then, as you know, including marketing. So social
Yeah.
media, how do you do it? Do you advertise? Do you not? How do you build followings? So there's not a morning that goes by that doesn't start with a learning curve.
Yeah.
And so you just have to kind of keep momentum, just one step at a time, and not give up.
Absolutely. And one thing that I found was actually a longer and perhaps more challenging process was the editing process
Oh, yeah.
on my first book. And I was honestly sort of doing it on my own, but I found the cover designer
Yeah.
and layout, and part of what I had with that company was they had professional proofreaders, which is great because I can't spell, or I'm not a very good speller and stuff. Thank God for autocorrect. But anyway, they go through and then you see all their edits, and you read your book. And my experience with my books was when they actually finally came out, I had read my books completely like 6 or 7 times in, a month.
Yep.
I didn't actually want to be around. Like I'm like, I love my book, but I really don't want to have to go reread that chapter because I know that I could dictate the chapter now
Sure.
because I've just
Sure.
reread it and stuff. Did you find sort of that same experience as you were going in? A novel, obviously much bigger. My books are not that long. A novel by definition is what, at least 200 pages, or is
Yeah, more. Yeah. So a reasonably commercial novel is about 70,000 words.
okay.
And both of my books have come in right around 80 to 95,000. So they're big projects, a lot
Definitely.
bigger. I mean, people are amazed as they've watched me go through the process, just how much work a book actually
Oh,
is.
it's
Soup to nuts. It's an unbelievable task.
it
And
is.
so it is interesting to go through that. And you do, when you get to the end of the book and it comes and it comes from the press and you see it, there is sort of a desire not to get back into it. Part of that, I think, is just trepidation that you're going to want to edit it again or change something or find a
Well, there's good enough.
mistake, right? I mean, there's 90,000 words. You're an indie publisher. The chances of there being a mistake are higher than, say, if it comes out of a regular publisher. So you worry about that kind of stuff. You try to be forgiving about it. I think with this, since I'm doing a 9-book series, I'm going to actually end up reading the books over quite a bit to maintain consistency, et cetera. So
Absolutely. But I guess my point was when you're the accidental lawyer, when
yeah,
that came out, when you finally got in your hand, you're all excited. But did you sort of have the experience of like, I don't know that I want to go in and read my own book? And I know that
yeah,
sounds terrible, but
yeah,
you're like,
no,
I
100%.
am like, I need a break. I think about any book. If you're like, I'm going to read this book cover to cover 6 times in a month, you'll probably be like, yeah, I'm done with that book for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there's also a desire for it to be complete, right?
Yeah.
The desire to just be done with a project. And so going back into it reignites sort of, do I want to change stuff, other things. So
Yeah.
you give up a little bit of that feeling of accomplishment and finality when you start interacting with the book again. So I
Absolutely.
totally get it. I think it's a very, very common feeling. In fact, I think I heard a quote from John Grisham at one point where they asked him, which was his favorite book to read, and he said he didn't read his own books. Like,
Yeah.
I
Well,
just
that's like Dame Maggie Smith, wonderful actress. So sorry that she's passed. However, in all these iconic roles in Harry Potter, Downton Abbey,
yeah.
just so many, and she's like, yeah, I actually have never seen any of them.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, and I think that's very common I've heard several actors say that, and I think that's fairly common for creatives in general. They're pleased with the work and they're happy other people are pleased and entertained by it. But I don't know how often they interact with their stuff after, the final clip or the final publishing is done.
Right. And I obviously go in and I'll go into my book now. It was just, I needed about a month of not going.
Sure.
And you're right. I mean, one of the things that was hard and in talking, doing coaching with some people who were authors and stuff, that concept of good enough, right? Yes, we don't want mistakes, but there literally has to be a point where you're like, I'm done. It is what it is. If I missed a period, a comma,
Yeah.
And you got to imagine that if you and multiple other people, some of whom are, their job is proofreading, if you've all missed something,
what can you do? Yeah.
Yeah, like what, and it does. It stinks when you go back and then you're like, oh man, how did we miss this? But I think some of that's a psychological thing of when you reread something, maybe you missed a the or an or something, but because you know the material, you know what it's supposed to say, your brain just skips over the fact that the isn't there.
100%. There's 100%. I mean, even in my professional life.
Right. I was going to say, as a lawyer, you guys are writing these really long briefs. You obviously are trying to get them as correct as possible. It's human. Mistakes happen. You may miss something.
That's true. And I think that's another thing to, when you talk about momentum in sort of what you deem an epic journey, right? It is one step at a time, but there is a little bit of being gentle with yourself or forgiving, because especially if you're learning something new for the first time, there are gonna be mistakes. You're gonna make errors. Things are not gonna go as well as you want in some places, and you just have to sort of pick yourself back up and believe in the project and keep moving forward, which is very important, because there are going to be things that come out of the blue, especially in this day and age of social media and essentially freewheeling reviews and commentary on Amazon or on any of the other book sites. You've left yourself open to just the vast array of different personalities on the internet. And some of those people say things that can be hurtful or bruise your ego, but you gotta look at the vast majority of the comments or vast majority of the feedback and believe in that something excellent is happening and that you still believe in the project.
Absolutely. And you're right. There are the people who their sole purpose is to try and tear you down for whatever their reason is. And I certainly know, as I'm out there posting stuff on social media, their videos, and sometimes there's what I believe they call the trolls, who are trolling for a reaction. They're saying negative things, and you just say, okay. I mean, not everyone's going to like my book, not everyone's going to like your book. The people who want to say bad about it, okay. It's like any job. Sometimes someone likes the job you're doing. Most of the people do, but some people don't. Okay.
Yeah, well, and you learn from it. I mean, you try to learn. One is getting a thick skin, right? But as a trial lawyer, or even in any legal function, there are a lot, not everything is a victory. So sometimes you go home on your shield. You try to learn the best you can from your losses. In fact, one of my favorite quotes from an old mentor of mine is that the only difference between an old lawyer and a young lawyer is that the old lawyer has been kicked in the teeth enough to know when to duck.
Yeah.
That's, it's a very true statement that you
Yes,
just have to learn from losses and mistakes.
absolutely. And, I tell people all the time, failure is part of the journey. We're going to
100%.
try stuff. I know as an entrepreneur, and you, now that you're sort of, you were talking about tools and stuff that you're using to help you write the book, and, or help craft it better.
Yeah.
Um, there are all kinds of fabulous tools out there. As an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, I've been very generous to buy many tools. Some of them just aren't, but they're not the right tool for me. It's not that they're bad, it's just
Yeah.
not what's going to work for me.
Yeah. 100%. No, I agree. Trial and error is a very big part of it.
And look, as a trial attorney, you go out and you try something, and one jury really loves that approach, and another jury you're looking and going, "Ooh, I'm losing the jury on this. They don't look happy with what I'm saying. What do I got to do? How do I
Yeah.
shift it around?" Um, yeah, I mean, all of this is fascinating, and uh, there is so much, and it honestly never ends. Like,
Yeah.
the marketing of your book isn't like, "Oh, all right, I'm going to go and do a marketing push." Well, my epic book came out, 3 years ago, and I'm still like, "Oh, what am I going to do? Am I going to do a promo? Am I going to do?" And lots of people, I don't know about you, Michael, but I get emails on the daily about, including it in this newsletter to
Yeah.
85,000 subscribers or whatever.
Yep.
People are willing to take your money to help you.
Oh yeah. 100%. Yeah. No, you're right. And navigating through good mentors and bad opportunities is really a great thing. I mean,
Definitely.
that's a learning exercise in and of itself.
Right.
That's a momentous project to undertake.
Definitely. So for you, what is it to be on this epic journey that you dreamed about?
Well, it's incredibly fulfilling. I mean, I love doing it. There are some hard days when you're like, why am I doing this? Why am I trying to do this? But overall, it's incredibly satisfying, especially when somebody really enjoys one of the books, whether
Yeah.
it's a review or people notice it. One of my favorite stories of all time is my wife had a copy of my first book, Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer, on a trip with her in Vail, Colorado.
Yeah.
And she started this thing on her social media where she just takes a picture of the book in any town she travels to.
Sure.
It's a shtick. And she had it up on sort of a sidewalk or a bench in downtown Vail in the little square there, and was taking the picture of it. And some woman came running from across the square to tell her how much she liked the book, that it was really a great book. And she was so glad she was reading it, and had no idea that my wife was the one that had the book, or she knew it or anything. So It was this wild sort of out of body experience for my wife, but incredibly grateful that just out of the blue, nowhere, a complete stranger really enjoyed the work. So those are very satisfying moments.
Absolutely. And I know with my books, there are people who, just come up and, maybe they've heard my name, or I'm at a conference or something. And it is, I love it. It's great when someone goes, "Oh,
Yep.
I read your book. I really liked it. It made a difference. I like this. I got a question about that." And I'm always so flattered and thrilled that
Sure.
something I created is helping other people. That's why I've written my books.
That is satisfying.
And, I mean, my first book is about sibling loss, and You See Over My Shoulder, Why Don't They Cry? That's for parents. And
Yeah.
I do get emails from people who, say, "Wow, that book was really helpful." And it's great.
That's
And
got to be
occasionally there are
wonderful.
people who I've had people come up to me and go, "Yeah, it was okay, but, I think you got this wrong," or whatever. I'm like, "Okay, thank you."
Yeah. No, still they interact with it and it made some impression, which is great, which is satisfying. Yeah. Sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I guess what I say is, well, at least they read it. They didn't have to like it, but at least they read the book. You know, there's another person in the read the book column. So,
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
right. So, Michael, how can people find your book? How can they get a hold of you if they're like they
Sure.
have questions or they want to shower you with praise?
Yeah, absolutely. So the books are both for sale on Amazon. Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer and Jake Fox Ties That Blind. Easy way to get a hold of me is through jakefoxthrillers.com.
Okay.
And then they can also email me at info@michaelstockham.com if they have any questions. Happy to answer anybody's questions at all.
Cool. Well, Michael, I want to thank you so much for joining me today.
It's been my pleasure, Zander. I've really enjoyed it.
Truly a epic conversation about book writing and novel writing. I want to remind everyone that if you're ready to begin your epic journey, go to epicbegins.com. And coming soon, the Epic Begins with One Step Forward TV show. Be on the lookout for it. And as always, I want to remind people that if you're ready to begin your epic journey, remember that epic choices lead to the epic life that you want.
Get your gift copy of the award-winning book Epic Begins with One Step Forward at epicbegins.com. That's a wrap on this episode of Epic Begins with One Step Forward with your host, Zander Sprague, best-selling author, internationally acclaimed public speaker, and licensed professional clinical counselor. To make your next conference or event epic, send an email to Zander at zander@epicbegins.com. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Remember, epic choices, epic life.